and welcome to another episode of Latitude. And in this episode, we're looking at a very important meeting of 4 heads of government or heads of state in Tokyo, which is known as the Quad Meet. But equally important is the various economic and security messaging that came out of the Quad Summit. And it's interesting to note that the Quad, which was an idea that was initiated by Japan around 2007, had really picked up momentum in the last couple of years around the COVID pandemic. And in the last year and a half, this is the third meeting of the heads of government, and a very important one, as we will see, with our 2 experts enlightening us about what really are the outcomes. The Quad, as the messaging goes, is clearly not a security initiative, but it is trying to convey the need to integrate security into economic, health, and technological and scientific initiatives that can collectively make the Asia-Pacific region an important body, primarily to challenge the footprints of China, which has been rather prominent there in the last several decades. We have with us Manjeet Kripalani, who is an outstanding journalist of the past, award-winning in various forums, and now the head of Gateway House in Mumbai, and looks at economic and climate and other initiatives that will impact our lives. And we have once again with us Dr. Manoj Joshi, eminent journalist, author, academic, intellectual, and particularly an expert on India's security challenges and Indo-US relations. And I'll start with you, Dr. Joshi, sir. I'm giving your seniority all the importance that it deserves. My first question is, the Quad sites are focused on China and its aggressive activities in the last several years, whereas the Quad hasn't really mentioned China formally in any of its pronouncements. But it's very clear that China seems to be the binding adhesive for the Quad members and possibly the Quad Plus. Now, is the military dimension of the Quad going to be left iffy till a major challenge comes the way, and then everyone is scrambling for the initiatives to put together? Because the fear amongst Quad members and in Asian countries is, what if China does in Taiwan what Russia went out to do in Ukraine? Your views, sir.
You know, Maroof, I went through the opening statements of the 4 leaders. What is interesting was that while the United States and Japan roundly criticized the Russian invasion of Ukraine, India was silent.
Yes.
And strangely enough, so was Australia. Meaning, of course, Australia had a new prime minister, but neither of these 2 mentioned this. Now, related to this, and from the basic question of the Quad's Asia focus, have been rising worries about a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan. Now, in London, earlier this month, Prime Minister Kishida himself said that he's worried about because this will affect Japan's survival, and Japan will get involved. And you know, a day before this Quad summit, President Biden said that the US will defend Taiwan against China. So the point I'm trying to make is that in this summit, China was very much there in the background, and particularly from the security background, and particularly with regard to Taiwan, but 2 of its members were silent. You see, they didn't refer to this. So all I'm trying to say is that as of now, the Quad has some way to go before it can shape itself as a security actor. For the security, that is why the United States and UK and Australia got together and created the AUKUS last year.
Yes.
That's a clear-cut security alliance for the region.
Yeah, a very well point, very well made. In fact, I was going to bring that up just after your intervention to say that, the AUKUS is more like a mini Asian NATO than Quad would ever be, because of the fact that Quad has taken upon itself a number of other initiatives which a military alliance would normally not get involved in, economic, health, agriculture, scientific exchanges. There seems to be a lot of push towards semiconductors and all sorts of things, which would leave NATO commanders completely at a loss to comment on if they were asked to comment on similar issues that concerns them, because these are issues which are bigger than what a military alliance would normally handle. But Manjeet, now here is something that I'm sure you can enlighten us, that the one big thing that seemed to be announced with much fanfare, but I don't know how much depth it has, is the Asia Pacific Economic, what is it? Is it a forum, or is it a foundation, or is it a framework? But it is something,
Framework,
IPEF, which is basically, people have two sides of views. Initially when such announcements are made in the press, there is a bit of a tizzy that, wow, there's something new come in and that's going to make us all wealthier and better off. But really, is that what IPEF is going to be? Or is it just to make up for the previous American withdrawal from Asian economic initiatives like the TPP, or an opportunity for India to get into the play, having dropped out of the RCEP because of China's overbearing presence there? Your views?
So Maroof, I think that it's fantastic that the US has opened the door for India to get into an agreement. It's not really as everyone loves to deny, it's not really a free trade agreement, but India is just starting to enter trade regimes. So the Australians were very, very helpful and helped us to enter a trade regime that we've been avoiding for a long time because we've been so protective about our own economy. Even though our companies compete so well abroad, for some reason they feel that they cannot compete at home. So we are now entering trade regimes, and I think it's fantastic that India is a part of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which you're right, is not RCEP, which we didn't get into last year, and it is also not the TPP, which obviously we didn't want to get into. What this allows us, there are several countries within Asia with which we also engage. Thailand, we have a free trade agreement with them, etc. This allows us to gingerly step into larger agreements. We are gingerly stepping into the trade agreement with Australia. We are gingerly going to then step into a trade agreement with the EU. We're going to gingerly step into an agreement with the UK. And this is a regional agreement. I think it's great that we're going to do it because it allows us time to step into an agreement of trade with a region in which we have a core strategic interest.
Okay, great.
ASEAN is very much China's play, right? So RCEP has been part of China. You're right. India didn't get into RCEP for purely domestic reasons, but this is the good way of being in a non-China agreement.
Yeah, well put, well put. In fact, just before the Quad meet, as we know, President Biden had engaged with ASEAN leaders and tried to get a kind of an American presence, and Dr. Joshi sir, an American presence in Asia, which goes beyond military muscle flexing. I mean, if you look back the last 2.5 decades or more, America has always been mentioned in Asia in a sense of taking on military engagements. But here is one where it seems to be that the Biden administration, 16 months down now, has tried to come up with an idea which will allow America to be seen as non-military centric, but a geopolitical centric superpower. But the issue is that the challenges that Asia faces are largely military in nature. yes, there's always the hope for economic growth and improvement. But how is it that America is going to be able to suck in everybody into its sphere of influence without offering them anything exceptional? Because I understand that this current IPEF is not going to make any out-of-the-way concessions to any countries that are becoming part of it. 13 have signed up, maybe more will. But what's the big deal in it? And how is the military dimension of the Quad going to be addressed? Because push comes to shove, that's where Quad will be expected to play a role.
Well, the Financial Times said that the American policy is all guns and no butter. Okay. So this is not the first time that they have tried this. 2 years ago, we heard about the Blue Dot Network. Then we heard about the Build Back Better plan. Nothing has happened. See, the point is the countries of the region, the challenge of China is a geopolitical challenge, which has an economic component and a military component. Now, the military component, fine. There's no doubt the United States is the premier military power in the Western Pacific as well as the Indian Ocean. But what people were looking for was that economic engagement. And the TPP was aimed precisely at that. Now, the United States walked out of the TPP. They are not going to get back into the CTPP. Now, the problem is, if you look at the writing around this IPEF, the Americans are saying, oh, it's actually all centered around the American worker.
Yes.
So they are not saying that, the point is that the countries of the region, the Asian region, ASEAN in particular, ASEAN trade with China is double that of its trade with the US. See? So what I'm trying to say is that they're looking for an American strategy of economic engagement. And frankly, the IPEF doesn't pass muster. I would call it, I call it IPUF. It's a big puff that they are giving out there. They are talking of all kinds of, flexible program. There will be 4 different areas: infrastructure, supply chain resilience, clean energy, digital trade. And then funnily enough, they're saying each country will be allowed to choose any one of those areas. And we don't know how it all comes together.
I know. I mean, some commentators have gone on to say that, this current framework that is being proposed is disappointingly thin in detail. And I think that's what is worrying to many others. But we'll come back after break to look at IPEF apart. What are the other issues that the Quad leaders deliberated upon? And are there really serious takeaways from this meeting other than photo opportunities? For that, after break. Welcome back. We are continuing to have our discussion with our 2 experts on the recently concluded Quad summit in Tokyo, amongst which the leaders put their hands together to support a new American idea called the IPEF. And that apart, there were other announcements about partnerships within Quad countries. But what is quite clear, that the IPEF may still provide countries like New Delhi an opportunity to enter into an agreement in an economic forum when India chose to opt out of the RCEP. But as one of our guests just brought out, Dr. Joshi, that if the IPEF is not going to find much enthusiasm within those who've been offered this, will it survive? Will it flounder? And if it flounders, what is it going to be meaning for India? In a sense that, is that India's last chance to get into an economic forum, and that too falls flat? Manjeet, your view?
Not at all. I think everybody, the world is waiting for India to join the international trade regime. And the one thing I agree with Manoj Joshi saying that there's not much substance to the IPF, and there's not been much substance to what has been coming out of the US these days. There's a lot of acronyms, lots of new engagements, but we must remember that this is a very different world. So these new agreements also have a large digital component in which India has certain strengths. There are no necessarily, we are a services sector economy more than a goods sector economy. And the United States, surprisingly, is also now a big services economy rather than goods. But it is a good way for us to also participate in these new agreements and start writing the rules. We have never written trade rules. These new trade rules are going to be written, and we are now an equal participant with the Quad on these rules. And we've got 3 developed countries, 1 developing countries, and we're completely equal. So we must remember that within the Quad, we have some weight, and China doesn't always carry it. The China, it's very important for India to participate in this because of what's going on in China, which is at our borders. No one is saying much about it, but I think we should view these agreements and this engagement as being everyone's recognition that China is on our borders and it is very dangerous for us. So Maroof, one thing I just want to add on, that the Quad now has this very expanded agenda, right? They've got 9 sectors. Pehle there was vaccine partnership, health security, climate, and now you've got critical emerging technologies, infrastructure cooperation, which is also what was the original Quad network and the Blue Dot network, etc. Cyber security, space cooperation, education, and humanitarian assistance and disaster, which is how the Quad eventually initially started. So the point is, with you, every time we have a meeting, you add something to it. Are we really, do we have the capacity to even manage all these things? Forget new trade regimes.
Okay.
So we need to start working on getting the talent of India, putting it together, and not just depending on government and ministries or consultants, but really getting the academic talent to come in and work on these big issues.
So if we move away from the trade engagements that were announced at the summit in Tokyo, I think 2 issues caught my attention. One was the Global Security Initiative that apparently had been around for some time, but China seems to be giving it more push because it wants to project a better picture as a more accommodative Asian power. And of course, the maritime domain awareness and the maritime related security initiatives. And Dr. Joshi, you are the best place to educate us on that.
See, I don't think there is much to the global security initiative. Basically, China doesn't have any friends. I mean, Pakistan, North Korea, Russia now. But I don't think anyone's going to sign up on that global security initiative. It's basically an anti-American move. But I think from the point of view of the Quad, this Indo-Pacific Partnership for Maritime Domain Awareness is extremely important, because this will offer a near real-time integrated maritime domain awareness picture. Any ship, anything that moves, you can track it, and this will fuse the output of different fusion centers. And for example, we have one in Gurgaon, which does Indian Ocean, and we have many people from Quad countries also, officers of the Quad countries participating in it. So you track every ship, every significant thing through these centers. It will also boost the ability of participant countries in Pacific Islands, Southeast Asia, Indian Ocean region, assist in humanitarian relief, and more important, smuggling and aid in fighting illegal fishing. That is where China is a big player. Illegal fisheries using the maritime militia, this is often, they use the maritime militia to harass and extend their border claims. So I think this is a very important initiative, and I think this can be fleshed out fairly easily.
Okay, so great. So moving on with the other than economic initiatives, Manjeet, I'm sure you'll be willing to educate us a bit on anything else that I have missed out on the economic initiatives that came out of Tokyo, but also throw a bit of light on Mr. Modi's engagements with particularly world leaders, particularly Mr. Biden.
One thing that the Quad has done, and it has reiterated this, is the critical technology supply chains. As we know, China controls a large portion, 80% of global critical minerals, either through itself, which it has, or through Democratic Republic of Congo, etc. And now with Russia on China's side, they also have critical minerals. So this is going to be really, really important. We have to be careful that China does not, this has to be, we have to move on it very fast, because should China move ahead in trying to capture Taiwan, they also capture the chip factories and chip technologies, which it already has, right? But it just makes it harder for everybody else. And India must start to participate in this game. I think there are some moves taking place, but not enough. And it has to be focused, because we don't even have the technical capability to do this. So we have to invite the investment, and maybe these new investment, we also signed the investment incentive agreement. And these are things where the two countries' governments together can start through capacity building, not just loans on.
Actually, that's a very Anything else? And that's a very important point.
And and lastly, for China, I think China is doing its best. It's realized it's been isolated, and it's now doing its best to lure American finance. They had kept the banking sector out, but they're doing their best by liberalizing their financial sector. But we know what China is doing to its own banks and its own technology companies. So it's hard. The opportunity for India is terrific. Maybe China will make a move towards India to allow us to send our software services to China. So I don't know whether we want to, since they're such copiers of patents. But I think that we might see some softening from China on one side, in the economic side, while seeing a hardening on the military side. So it's going to be a very exciting time.
Yeah, that's the sum of China's approach. And it has always been insisting vis-a-vis India that let's separate the two. But it's not easy for us to do that for a variety of reasons, as we know only too well. But thank you very much for your inputs, and thank you very much for enlightening us. And I'm sure the viewers would have learned a lot more about Quad, IPEF, and a whole lot of other acronyms that keep getting thrown at us from the international community, but more of some of these issues in another show. Until then, goodbye.